First and foremost, thanks again to all of you for joining us for this panel today. I am extraordinarily lucky because I have the pleasure of introducing one of my professional inspirations and professional mentors, Gina McCarthy. When I think about Gina, and we're talking about a hometown hero here in Boston, I can't think of anyone better to lead a conversation around transportation, given everything that she did at EPA for our fuel efficiency standards. If you've ever had the chance to meet Gina and you've heard her say cabin, then you know that she's from Boston. She's an alumna of UMass Boston. She developed the very first climate protection action plan in Massachusetts. She went on to serve as the head of the Environmental Protection Agency under President Obama. She has shaped environmental policy in this country, and she's pushed through the Clean Power Plan, fuel efficiency standards, and protections for drinking water. She's tough, she is fearless. The very first time I had the opportunity to meet Gina McCarthy, this was down in Washington, D.C. She was being interviewed by Bill Nye, the Science Guy. And she said something that really stuck with me and really shaped the work that I do here in Boston. She said, you know what? I'm not about protecting the environment. I'm about protecting people. My job is a public health job. My job is about saving lives. And that's really changed the way that I talk about climate. It's changed the way that I've led the work that we do on sustainability. I really have to be thankful for her. So even before we bring her up to the stage, if we can give Gina a round of applause for that. Gina is continuing her great work here in the city of Boston as the director of the Center for Health and the Global Environment at Harvard University. And now, can we have a warm welcome for Administrator Gina McCarthy.
Austin, Boston. Well, thank you, Austin, for the great introduction. Austin is passionate about everything in life, including golf, apparently, which is why he hurt his arm. I'm still trying to figure out how you swing a pitching wedge and end up hurting your arm. Can you explain that to me? With vigor, I guess. But it's wonderful to be here. First of all, I want to thank Mayor Walsh for his continued leadership, and you as well, Austin, for all of the great work. This is my city, in case my accent is fooling you in some way. I grew up in the city of Boston. I live here. I love it. I think it's the best city ever. My apology to every other mayor here. But I think mayors are all really quite awesome. And so I want to thank you, not just for being here, but for being the real human beings that step up every single day. You know, I've worked at the local level, I've worked at the state level, I've worked at the federal level. Mayors are it, baby. You make things happen, and I can't thank you enough for that every day. And I don't think there's been any time in my recollection when stepping up is more necessary than it is today. Because things are, in my opinion, a bit nuts in Washington on the issues of climate change. They are at best sound asleep, and at worst kind of a nightmare. And so to see mayors stepping up is incredibly important. And there's a couple of reasons why I think you're sort of the natural allies in this. And I would, I always know that I can count on mayors for a couple of reasons. One is that, you have to keep it real. You can't sit around and deny things that are sitting right in front of your face. You actually deal with real people every day. You actually have to meet with them. You have to go to the grocery store and you see them. So to go up to them and say, hey, climate change is no problem, just put your waders on and let's muscle through it. You can't deny things to real people in real time. So Washington, D.C. may want to say climate change isn't real, but we know it is, and you're facing it every day, and you have to because it's your responsibility as a mayor to deal with real human beings' needs. That's why you ran for office. That's why people ask you to take on these responsibilities. Now, we all know that climate change is real. We also know that it's man-made emissions that are causing it, and we also know that that's why women need to rule the world. So women mayors here, you're stepping it up, baby. But in all honesty, we know climate change is not a joke. But do we have to get so morose about it? Yes, we need change. We need change in lots of ways today. Why don't we just think about that change and funnel all of our energy, our passion, and investment to get more than just addressing climate change, but let's address insignificant things like public health. Why don't we think about this instead of falling over and going, oh, woe is me, climate change is so big. Why don't we just narrow it down and cut it down to size? It's carbon pollution, C-A-H-B-O-N. Get over it. We have to deal with it. Why would the United States run away from what is perhaps the biggest challenge that we have ever faced as a threat to this country and cede all of the opportunities for economic development to other countries? Why would we want to do that? That's what climate denial gets you. It's sticking your head in the sand and guess what's out there exposed? Your butt. So we have to go kick a few butts of those who have their heads in the sand. Let's just buck it up. Let's just realize that, yes, we have challenges in the United States today. We have leadership that doesn't want to lead on the issue of climate change. Well, I see lots of little leaders out there that are doing just that. And we have to get together once in a while and celebrate the fact that we are facing reality and we're actually going to turn the challenge of climate change into opportunities for public health benefits, for national security benefits, for job benefits, for economic growth benefits. That's what we're going to do. That's what we have to do because you know that real people need leadership. They need people to stand up and be honest and excited and energize them, not say, oh, Washington isn't doing anything, so I guess we can't either. It's just simply not true, which is why the second reason I know mayors lead. Because I've been working in the environmental field doing public health work for decades. And I know that every good idea, every innovation, every drive that has ever changed this country has started at the grassroots level. Every single one of them. If you can name me anything the federal government thought of that was innovative and creative, that hadn't been started 20 years before at the local level, then I'll give you that one, but I haven't thought of one yet. Because all of the creativity starts there, because people need it. They need to be creative. These are challenging issues, so they try things. It works. And then the grassroots bugs all of the mayors saying, look, it worked in my neighborhood, you got to do it. Then the mayors go, okay, after a while, it's annoying enough. You'd start taking action. Then the mayors get together. Then the governors have a fit because mayors are all over the place. Then they say, wow, this is a great idea. And then all the states start getting together. And then the federal government goes, oh my God, we have a patchwork of states. I'm going to come in with a resolution, and their resolution is exactly the damn thing that the grassroots organization started years before. But this is democracy. This is what it's supposed to be. So everybody looks at me today like I must be devastated. I am a dead woman walking because everything I worked on for the past 30 years is going down the tubes. Well, guess what? I ain't devastated. I never expected Washington to be my savior. I never expected that this administration would embrace the challenge of climate change, but I also never expected the United States of America to abandon the challenge of climate change, and guess what? It hasn't. So the mayor standing up with saying we are still in ought to be absolutely saluted for your courage, your tenacity, but you're also the people who are just on the front line of these issues that cannot deny it and will not deny it. And I'm excited about the businesses that are all in. For crying out loud, businesses have to be all in. They have to be, because they know that this is an economic challenge that we simply cannot avoid. When you have a Joint Chiefs of Staff, including General Mattis, who talks about it today, he says that public health is the challenges associated with climate change, challenges with water quality, with scarcity. These are the things that create instabilities. And we know that that has created instabilities internationally, but guess what? It's going to create them in the United States of America if we don't get in front of these issues. We have international companies that are already seeing disruptions that they just can't handle if they want to keep their bottom lines healthy. We have innovation and innovators who understand that they can make money on the challenges of today, and why wouldn't we want them? So I am with Secretary Kerry of saying we have a big challenge, and I'm with him when he says that we can work our way out of this challenge and we can make good things happen. And that's what today is all about. Now look, I know everybody's worried, at least I wake up every morning worried about all the rollbacks at EPA. Oh, they're gonna get rid of the Clean Power Plan, so we're gonna go back to coal. We're gonna create some little hunky way of doing that using really old laws that had nothing to do with this. Okay, so go ahead, start those things. But the interesting thing is that you don't need rules if the markets are already there. Rules are to protect people's freedom, not to take it away, by making sure that the economy values human life. Every human life values health. Guess what's happening in clean energy? They're doing that. They've figured it out. No matter what is happening in Washington, we are kicking ass, and we're gonna keep kicking ass because it's cheaper to do that. So good luck. Try those hinky things, but it ain't working. And in transportation, we also are seeing incredibly interesting and creative things that we're gonna talk about today. Changes in the way we think about transportation. Because transportation isn't roadways, it's about how to move people and goods around. That's what transportation is all about. And there's creativity in that marketplace. Now, I realize that now the car companies, which have done so good for the past 10 years, record-breaking good, hiring hundreds of thousands of people, finally selling cars that people in the United States will actually purchase. I like that. Now they've decided maybe they want to rethink this, and there's going to be some more rollbacks proposed. Well, I have to tell you that that ain't going to work either. That ain't going to work for two particular reasons. Is the United States actually likes fuel-efficient vehicles. The United States is actually producing electric vehicles. The challenge we are facing is not a rule challenge. The challenge is whether we are going to be the country that invests the most in these technologies to be able to take advantage of it, or are we ceding all of that leadership continually to other countries like China, which has really good energy technology that can fuel electric vehicles? Are we going to allow General Motors to decide to build lots of electric vehicles and promptly ship them to China because China is making the world demand on electric vehicles? We have to demand that our countries support us and our infrastructure so that we can continue to have good air quality in this country, and we deliver that air quality to every community. Because if you think the only problem with clean air is in New Delhi, you are wrong. We have communities in this country that have been left behind, and we cannot allow that to continue. We have to take responsibility for those communities that have been left behind. 7 million people every year die prematurely because of air pollution. And it's not just in New Delhi. It's even in communities in the city of Boston. Where does a lot of that pollution come from? It comes from our transportation sector. So everybody would love to point fingers and say, look at clean energy in the power sector, we got it, the big guys. Well, guess what? Transportation is now 30% of the greenhouse gases that are emitted. Transportation is a big driver of asthma in our kids. It's a big driver of heart attacks and lung disease in adults. So let's get real, folks. Let's stop talking about polar bears and birds and bunnies. That's not what climate change is all about. Climate change is about our health, our kids' health, and our future. I'm not now situated at the Harvard School of Public Health because I'm worried about polar bears. I'm talking about climate change and public health, because if you're gonna think about investing huge amounts of money in climate change, which we will have to invest one way or another, why aren't we raising the public health quality for all of our kids and all of our adults? Why aren't mayors thinking about, if you're buying electric buses, which everybody now loves and so do I, why don't we think about first putting them in those communities that need those air quality benefits the most? That's where you want to go. And if you're worried about cost benefit, that's the cost of thinking less about public health and more about birds and bunnies, is you miss the forest for the trees. I want to get healthy today, and I want my kids to have a great future. That's how we have to think about it. That's how the United States faces its problems. And yes, there are challenges in New Delhi. And can you imagine the Paris Agreement? Everybody signed off. The United States is taking a back seat, and we're demanding that New Delhi actually take a front seat, or India. And we're telling them, and by the way, can you skip all the steps that we went through and just think about correcting climate change for us? Well, if I were them, I wouldn't be really too beholden to my request that they actually take action on climate change. But if you tell them that 1.1 million people are prematurely dying every year in India because of air quality, then maybe they'll start making the kind of investments that we think will get them on a path to sustainability. Maybe they would. And guess what's creating those problems? Coal-powered generation and primitive cook stoves. We know how to fix both of those things. And guess who that impacts? Women and children the most. So we are not talking about some pie-in-the-sky issue. We're talking about standard everyday pollution that we in this country have tackled for generations and made huge success. I just want you to cut climate change down to size and treat it as a manageable issue where investments will matter. We didn't get to the clean energy economy of today in the United States in the power sector by sitting around going, oh, woe is me. President Obama invested heavily in clean energy. We did the right thing by demanding that our energy be clean enough so that our kids could be healthy. And as a result, we have tremendous innovation in that area. So let's relax, everybody. Stop worrying about what's going on in DC. Start doing everything that we can do moving forward, because these are big deals. And we have opportunities today to actually make great steps forward if we think creatively, not just about arguing about climate change, but think about what we're fighting amongst ourselves about. It is truly amazing to me. Basically, if you're a climate denier, you're trying to prevent us from going to an economy that's healthier, an economy that's greener, where we value open space, where we look at new transportation systems, other than just everybody being in their own vehicle. Now, I love the city of Boston, but now the busy times are all the time. You can't get around. So wouldn't it be awful to spend money on public transportation? Wouldn't it be incredible to tell the students today that really don't want to buy a car, that you don't need to in the city of Boston? I think my children would be thrilled if I never drove again. And frankly, most of you who are visiting from elsewhere would be thrilled to never have to drive in the city of Boston again, because we're crazy-ass drivers. I mean, let's face it, right? So what are we fighting about? What are we denying? We're denying our ability to have a future. We're pretending that change isn't going to happen, that we don't need to, that we can go back to the past. We all know that's not true. We're changing constantly in this country. The question is, who's going to lead that change? Who are the heroes that we have to rely on, who are going to understand reality and see a future that's brighter, a future that's more sustainable? Do you know that it's estimated that in 2050, we are going to have 9.7 billion people living on this earth? 2/3 of them are going to be living in cities. Where? 2/3 of them, and 3/4 of those buildings have not even been built yet. Think about it. We have to get smart. We have to get creative. We have to innovate. And we do have an ability to grab that future, and instead of denying it, let's run towards it. Let's set a path forward that actually is as creative as the United States always is when it is faced with these types of challenges. You know, we have an ability to make progress. We have the European Union right now is talking about banning the internal combustion engines. I thought that would be unheard of. Someone mentioned that to me 3 years ago. I said, that's ridiculous. It's happening now. They've set a far-off date for it, but it will happen. Will we do that? Will our cities do that? Will our states do that? Will we make that leap? There are people putting money into this and betting that that change is going to happen here as it's changed everywhere. And we have utilities that would love to see electric vehicles advance because they have more demand than they need now, because energy efficiency people have been really good at what they did. I love it. It's left this gap in the system. Well, let's run for that. Let's move forward. And of course you need to have that electricity generated by really, really good and clean technology. But we are moving in that direction at speeds that nobody ever anticipated. And we have this little thing called Volkswagen settlement. Money, 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 money. It is so cool. Do you realize it's $2.7 billion that are going to be given out over the course of 3 years, and that money is going directly to states, and some of the money is going directly to tribes, and it's yours to decide what to do with, as long as it's all about reducing emissions of diesel. No wonder you like electric buses. I love this. There's money actually to be creative and to think about moving forward at the same time as these individuals in Washington seem to want to think that that's not important anymore. But you know better than that. That's why this gathering is so important. That's why the folks that I'm going to bring up now are so important. Because if people have thought differently about how to finance transportation improvements, how to deliver it, how do we make change in cities that will allow us to be healthier and live more productive lives and keep our kids safe? What are the exciting ways that we're hearing to move forward? How do you create leadership? How do you create momentum? And it's going to be wonderful. You know, when I was at the Science March a little while ago, there was a sign that really impressed me. It said, "Science needs heroes." Well, the folks that I'm bringing up are 3 wonderful heroes that can give us some great ideas on how to build a transportation system that matches the fact that we are in the 21st century. And we are going to change. The question is going to be, are we going to be the one at the end of the line, or are we going to be in the leadership position? We need to lead. Come on up, heroes. Thanks very much. All right, let's take a minute to basically introduce my panel today, because it's pretty outstanding. Here's Tracy. Tracy Zen is the president of Zipcar. She's had that role since January of 17, and she is basically leading what is essentially the world's best car network. It's quite amazing. It's for car sharing. If you haven't been familiar with Zipcar, it's because you've been hiding, I think. It's basically now in 500 cities, and those cities in college campuses are wildly interested in it because, as I said before, kids aren't in love with their cars as much as they used to be. It gives them an alternative. For me, I think it's terrific, and I want to thank you for being here. We also have Mayor Sly James. It's great to have you here. He was elected in Kansas City, Missouri as the mayor and sworn in 2011. He was born in Kansas City. I love this. He credits his parents for understanding what resilience and dedication means and for giving him a great sense of the value of education, which he has been a champion on. He's a member of the Black Mayors for Education Reform, the Mayors Against Illegal Guns, and he was elected in June of 2013 to the advisory board of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. And prior to being mayor, he enjoyed 3 decades of work as an attorney. We won't hold that against him. He served his country as a Vietnam vet. Thank you for that. He's married with 4 kids, and one of the most interesting things about him, he's the lead singer in the Amelia Earhart Memorial Flying Band. So that's what my first question is going to be is, what? And they once opened for Jefferson Airplane in Kansas City. That is the coolest thing ever. You know, he once said, a person with an idea, that's the economy of the future. That means a lot to me, and I want to thank you for having that insight. And last but certainly not least, because she is a force of nature, is Rosabeth Moss Cantor. She holds the Ernest L. Arbuckle Professorship at Harvard Business School. I call it Harvard now that I'm there. And is also the chair and director of Harvard University's Advanced Leadership Initiative, which is a collaboration across all of Harvard schools to help successful leaders at the top of their professions apply their skills to addressing challenging national and global problems in their next stage of life. Rosabeth has been a very prolific writer as well. She's an expert on strategy, innovation, and leadership for change, and she's advanced many numerous national and global corporations and public sector leaders to really rethink their life and to think about how they reapply their lessons and skills. Her latest book, called Move, Putting America's Infrastructure Back in the Lead, is an interesting way to look across industries and technologies to see how the future gets shaped. How do we see mobility? And so it's going to be wonderful to hear from her what she has seen internationally, as well as across the country. So with those introductions, let me just give you a general floating question, and you can take it where it goes. I'm interested to know why you decided on looking at transportation. What made that the thing for you to get excited about and engage in? And what is the one lesson that you want to make sure that you impart today to all of us that you've learned in your journey?
Anyone?
Go for it.
Well,
I don't believe in going in order.
all right, cool. Well, first of all, it's great to be here. It's always good to see mayors. I love working with the mayors that we know. I think transportation is important for a number of different reasons. Number one, transportation is really important to attract young talent to our city. And I look at that from the standpoint of exactly what you said earlier. Young people are not enamored with cars, and they certainly are not enamored with the cost of cars when they're trying to pay down $50,000, $60,000, $75,000, $100,000 student loans, but they still need to get around. So public transportation is a huge asset to any community. Secondly, transportation is absolutely vital to equity. You cannot have economic equity if you do not have public transportation, because the people who are in need of the equitable issue, the bridge, are the ones who are least able to afford private transportation. And if they could shed their private transportation, they would have more options in terms of expendable income, but also they would be able to get from their homes to jobs or centers where jobs can be located and back without having to spend part of their money, 25% or so of their money, on transportation in the private sector.
That's terrific. Thanks, Mayor. And I know that you've done a lot of work on smart cities, and transportation is really a part of that.
Well, smart cities includes transportation, because transportation, one of the things that we want to do with smart cities is we want to look at ways to be more efficient. Efficiency also includes sustainability. And so we collect a lot of data, we analyze a lot of data, and that data can be used to facilitate transportation. For example, when we go to putting GPS in our vehicles, for example, which are now mostly compressed natural gas, we have electric, we're also moving to other forms. When we do that, then we are able to find more efficient routes for our city vehicles to do things like pick up trash, etc., which means they spend less time on the road. Also, using smart and connected cities data, we're able to do more synchronization of our signals so that people spend less time. We are also able to signal buses that are fully loaded so that they travel faster, which makes the experience better. We're able to wire those buses with Wi-Fi so that they're able to have a better experience, which means more people ride public transportation, gets more people off the road, it reduces the carbon emissions into the environment.
Tracy, I know you've been in transportation a lot longer than your time at Zipcar. Do you want to tell us about your journey, why transportation, why you think it's important?
Sure. Well, I've been in travel technology for Expedia and TripAdvisor, mostly on the consumer side before joining Zipcar. But I would say Zipcar is my first foray into transportation. And when I think about why Zipcar, why I took the job, there are many reasons, but the first two are, firstly, I was a Zipcar member. I grew up in New York City. I lived in London for 6 years, and now I live in Boston. So the problem of getting around the city and ownership of a vehicle is just, it's not really sustainable. So I, personally understood the benefits of the product and the offering. So for me, that was really important. And secondly, I think the most exciting part of Zipcar is because it's a mission-driven company, the mission being to enable simple and responsible urban living. And I think for us, that's really critical, because there are very few companies that are mission-led, and we offer a product and a service that actually changes the way that people live in cities. So that's really exciting from my perspective. So when I look ahead in terms of the opportunities of what Zipcar can do and the impact that we can make on cities around sustainability, equity, and congestion, I think it's an exciting time. And if you marry that with the innovation and technology, it's a sort of the perfect time to join.
That's terrific. Rosabeth, what have you seen?
Okay, so first of all, I backed into transportation. That's not just a bad metaphor about backing into things, because I'm very interested in U.S. competitiveness and how we're doing with respect to the rest of the world, how we build the future economy, but future society, community as well, well-being of people. And among other things, just an informal thing, Rodney Slater, a former U.S. Secretary of Transportation, is a really good friend of mine. He was a fellow in our Advanced Leadership Initiative at Harvard. And as I kept talking to him, I began to see that transportation affects everything, absolutely everything. I certainly support what Mayor James said about equity, because the places that don't have it are left behind totally, and there are places where people are totally stuck. And those are the parts of cities that are subject to those flaring tempers in August and rioting and other things that cause social ills. There are the health, there's the education. If you can't get any place, you're stuck. And I began to realize how important that was, and then I did do the international and the national journey, and it resulted in my book, because mobility is opportunity. If you can't move, you can't get anywhere. And so transportation became so important, and looking around the world, best practices, et cetera, and the future. I know people are gonna think I'm gonna say groovy things like flying cars, and there are people trying to make flying cars here. I was just in Paris at a huge tech expo at the end of May 24th to 26th, and flying cars were all over the place. It's not that they're real yet, But in fact, it was all part of France. President Macron deciding that France should be a center of the tech economy of the future, Paris. And I thought, no, no, Boston, Miami, maybe Kansas City. You want Kansas City?
Absolutely.
As we build this new economy and compete in the future. So it's not flying cars, it's not hyperloops are a cool idea, you know, tunneling underground and sending us like in pneumatic tubes really fast between LA and San Francisco. I don't think the best practices that I've seen are these really cool futuristic things. It's fun, and we should have our young people imagining them. We should have our tech centers thinking about them, but it's really much more basic. So the best things are things like, if you're thinking about transportation between cities, high-speed rail. And Japan. In Japan, not only do the bullet trains go 200 miles per hour on average, but on average, they're delayed on average. You know, we know delays are a big thing with public transportation. They're delayed on average about 30 seconds a week. You know, it's not, they do pretty well. We have here things that are now called high-speed rail. So the Excella between Amtrak between Boston and New York and Washington can only go at its maximum speed, which might be 150 miles an hour for a very short stretch of track, maybe between Rhode Island and Connecticut, because our infrastructure is so old. So forget that. There's a new high-speed rail unveiling in Florida, the Bright Line. And Houston, yes, Houston, and it took 20 years to get the voters to approve it. It's such a great idea. I was just in I won't talk about Florida then, where the maximum speed of the Bright Line is about 70 miles per hour. And you know, there are accidents because people don't yet have the habits to know what happens when a train goes by at 70, forget 200, 70 miles per hour. They try to go across the grade crossing, and you can't beat a train at 70 miles an hour. In Houston, it's just great, Houston to Dallas, but I was in San Antonio, and I was hearing about an alternative plan that would include San Antonio. I spoke at Law Day in San Antonio. And so, you know, what we think is fast, we're just not thinking about world standards. That's the reason to do that. We should think beyond world standards. We should think we can be absolutely the best. So that's one between cities, other things between cities, within cities. There are so many things that work, but they have to connect. So Zipcar is great. I'm a big Zipcar fan. I'm a big fan of whenever we work out, you know, good behavior, ride-hailing services, but they've got to connect to public transit, because without public transit, we're going to leave a lot of people behind, and we're going to be stuck with a single occupant vehicle. Yep. And in some ways, electric, of course, much better, but I don't care whether it's electric or internal combustion engine at the moment, because people are stuck in it and they can't move, and so we lose productivity. We are frustrated. Parents can't get home to see their children if they commute, and this is a problem in every city of the world. A lot better if you're not breathing awful air while stuck in traffic and or looking for parking. So maybe autonomous vehicles. I think a lot of autonomy will be built into vehicles, a lot of sensors, a lot of things that make them safer. I don't think autonomous vehicles are going to be on the roads unless in dedicated lanes for a while, because there are too many issues to work out. But there's lots of other ways to use tech to have vehicles.
But Rosebeth, you're taking all the fun out of it. I want flying vehicles.
I do too. I mean, I can't, you're sitting there in
You say
traffic.
flying cars, I think, meet George Jetson.
You know, you're sitting there in traffic and you do want to take off and get above all that traffic. But so just one more, not to take the fun out, but one more serious point, and one of the things that I actually love about Kansas City is the degree to which you not only had smart city plans, but were willing to innovate and had for a while a prototype of a sort of urban system that would get people places that the buses didn't. with Wi-Fi on board, great for our millennial commuters, and would see where people actually want to go and then be able to send on-demand vehicles on exactly those routes. So we could experiment with those kinds of things. We could experiment with the vehicles, but they've got to be connected. And I will give another Florida shout out, because the SMART plan in the greater Miami region is really smart, because even though it may be hard to get the taxpayers to want to do it, it's 6 corridors at once that would include last mile connections that might be through ride hailing, but you have to think about the whole picture at once. And in Houston, you know, you've thought comprehensively for years, and finally you get a piece of it. And my field is really leadership, and it's the courage to begin to present visions of the future. And one other vision of the future, sorry.
I asked for one, so we're on a number.
All right, I did about 5, but I have another one later.
You know, you'll get it. You know, I thought it was really funny when you talk rideshare. None of us are afraid to say zip car, but we're not exactly interested in saying certain names when you say rideshare.
Lyft.
So, no, there you go. Well, that's why I wanted to get back to Tracy, is you know, people seem really comfortable with the way Zipcar works and the freedom and flexibility it gives. So how have you been able to avoid sort of some of the controversies of others?
Sure. I think it starts with the mission. You know, the company was built, it was founded in Boston by 2 women entrepreneurs.
Oh, that's why. Okay.
Yes. Well, so I think that's
said.
So it starts there. I mean, Zipcar was founded in year 2000, so I think people are really surprised when I say that, when it's 18 years ago. And I think part of the ethos of the company is really around being able to operate at that point in time in 2000 and convincing cities that car sharing made sense. That was a big leap. Today, and when we talk about car sharing, sharing economy, you know, apps, phones, that was this is a part of the whole, you know, modern vocabulary. But back in 2000, cities thought we were crazy to say, well, you know, people are going to share vehicles. So I think part of how we've avoided some of the controversy is we've started the company in the very beginning understanding that private and public partnerships are critical for our success. And I think all through the history of the company, we've been very collaborative. I mean, Mayor James had been a huge supporter for us when we launched in Kansas City. But every city that we go into, we really seek the support of the cities and the mayors to really understand the needs of the city, which there's a lot of commonality, but each city we also recognize have different challenges. So I think that's been the key sort of ethos of the company around how we operate. And I think going forward, we also recognize that if you balance the needs of the city, because we're a local business, we're a global business, but we're also serving the local urban residents. I think if you balance with the needs of the local residents and the city, and you always put our member base at the core of what we're trying to do, I think you make the right decisions for the business.
Well, that's a terrific message, because I think one of the big questions on transportation, and this gets to some of the things you mentioned, Rosabeth, is it's very hard to figure out how to finance some of these changes. And so, you know, high-speed rail ain't cheap. You know, I went to the opening of the high-speed rail in Fresno that they're starting, and it's just sort of one link in California. And I did an event with Jerry Brown, this is when I fell in love with Jerry Brown. Well, maybe I fell in love with him earlier, but I reignited the flame when he said, yeah, he said, basically he stood up, he said, you know, I saw, they proposed this high-speed rail. I saw how much money it was going to cost. I thought it was ridiculous. We couldn't possibly afford it. My wife convinced me that we should do it. He said, I still don't know how we're going to pay it, but she says it's a good idea, so we're opening this thing. Did you love that or what? I'm like, how does he get away with this? It's great. It was great. But he sort of convinced himself about getting excited about it. But public-private partnerships have to be part of the game here. Are there new things that we're seeing about financing these strategies? And are businesses stepping up? Are they part of the solution here?
Well, I can tell you that in Kansas City, public-private partnerships are huge. They're huge partners in our Smart Connected Cities efforts. There's probably, they've contributed about $18 million in the last few years to our ongoing efforts. And here's one of the interesting things about it. For example, the main spine of smart cities in Kansas City is the streetcar downtown, which, by the way, was interesting to finance. We financed it through a transportation development district, a 1-cent sales tax levied in the district, and property tax assessments depending on your proximity to rail. And it was met with a lot of anger by the businesses in particular. And it was kind of interesting because under the TDD statute, residents of the TDD vote, and they vote by mail that is notarized. Well, most of the business owners don't live where their businesses are, so they weren't able to vote, and man, were they ticked. But the residents there loved the concept, so it passed. It is so successful that it is free. Now, with the fact that the streetcar is free, and with the streetcar being free, we have in 2 years experienced 4 million riders, 75% of whom are Kansas City residents. In that area of the TDD, there is so much activity now because it is free. You can get on, ride a block, get off, buy something, get back on, ride another block, get ice cream, get back on, ride another block, buy cookies. That 85% increase in sales tax revenue is taking place in that district. So that generates a lot of economic activity. Now, the economic activity is being generated allows us to do things with that increased tax dollar. So one of the things that we've done is we've also found a way to monetize some of the smart city technology that we're using. For example, at the streetcar stops, there are kiosks. Those kiosks collect information and data, but it also pushes out information and data. So if you want to know if I'm at 12th and Main at 5 o'clock on weeknights, is this a good place to open a restaurant? And you can grab that data from our open data portals and analyze it and decide whether yes or no. If you already got a restaurant, you can find out how many people are there because of all the sensors and things, and whether or not it's a good time to offer happy hour specials. So the
When is it?
I generally think that the only time it's not good to have a happy hour special is between 2:30 and 2:35 a.m. Every time, the rest of the time ought to be a happy hour special.
We're off to Kansas City.
So we're financing our major transportation using the TDD method. The problem with that is that it only really works where you have a commercial area. You cannot collect a 1-cent sales tax in a residential area, and you cannot raise the property tax assessments to such a level to make it work. So the good news is that the commercial areas are throwing off so much money that we don't have to worry so much about the 1-cent sales tax moving into residential. So financing is crucial. But the public-private partnerships is the best thing in the world that happens because the private entities are able to use our areas as proving grounds, and we're able to take advantage of their technology to show that it does work and push that information out. One last point. We also have a program in Kansas City, Innovation Partnership, where we encourage our tech people, tech startups, what have you, people who want to create apps for one purpose or another or some sort of predictive analytics, whatever the case may be, to work with the city through an ordinance. We have an ordinance and a process we go through. They sign a contract with us, an MOU. And they can use our infrastructure to test their products or service. So they do that, which pushes out more data and grabs more information, but we also have a requirement that they stay in town and that we get to use their stuff and that they build their business in our city. So it works. It's a rotational type thing where everybody gets fed.
That's a tremendous win-win. And by the way, the other thing I was going to say about the cool thing that you have to do is you have to have broadband everywhere. And we don't in America. There's even a broadband dead spot between Cambridge and Belmont, Massachusetts, in the heart of, tech-savvy Boston. Yes, there is a little Cell phone dead spot. We need
Is that where Mitt Romney used to live? I mean, just kidding. Just kidding. I worked for Mitt Romney. He was a great guy.
Gina, I think you're very, very clever and close to where he used to live. But that isn't why. But in any case, on the public-private partnerships, I love that because that's exactly the kind of model. In fact, Rahm Emanuel in the what do we call it, the reinvention of Chicago, he wanted one of everything that anybody had, including New York or other cities. You need to want one of everything that people have and make yourself a test site. You know, we're a place where people can come and experiment. And the private sector loves that kind of thing. They may want a few tax incentives if they're Amazon, but we'll see what happens with the Amazon headquarters too. But yeah, yeah, I know. But they may not go to the place where they have the biggest tax incentives. I mean, that's the other thing. They want an educated workforce, and the innovation is private sector innovation. So the high-speed rail that I was talking about earlier, in Texas, and not the metro in Houston, but the high-speed rail in Texas and in Florida, private sector. Now, they want, you know, a few things here and there from the public sector, but it starts with private sector imagination and innovation. And they want places to test it, improve it. They want friendly environments. They want help getting the land. Land rights, a big issue in all of these things. But the private sector is ready. Often, by the way, you have to be very internationally minded in every city because often the big investors are foreign companies, not U.S. companies. You know, that's changing somewhat. But those who believe in infrastructure tend to be from other countries, Australian banks, that kind of thing. But so what? I mean, if they want to invest in your community, Miami has a shiny new, wonderful, state-of-the-art tunnel connecting parts of the port, environmentally very friendly, gets trucks off the road, does a lot of other things. And that was heavily financed by a public-private partnership with a foreign finance company. And then the additional tax revenues, which you alluded to, that's how we built the Intercontinental Railroad. The Intercontinental Railroad was built with the assumption that it would develop parts of the country. It was also a defense move, you know, protect this territory that you had seized from people who had been there for thousands of years. But it was definitely an investment in development that occurs once you have public transportation. Once you have transportation, the amount of activity around that, so you do it in a suburban stop, right, and watch the number of restaurants grow around that stop. So it doesn't have to be unfriendly development, could be very people-friendly, but this is an investment in economic development, among other things. And then do it green and clean, and you save money, save lives, and have a great reputation because everybody wants to come there so they can breathe the air. One of the reasons that one of the cities that didn't make the final cut for an Amazon second headquarter was ambivalent about their bid was they didn't want all those extra people who might congest and pollute. They wanted to breathe it was a western state, they wanted to breathe their clean air.
There are many people in Seattle who have been telling me that we should probably rethink.
Oh, yeah.
There's lots of downsides and upsides, but I think the thing that annoys me most about Amazon is all the damn boxes. If you're buying a toothpick, it comes in a box about this big. You know, but can we just talk about goods movement a little bit?
Yeah, can I just say,
yes,
one more thing about that, because exactly that was on my list too, which is how about alternative delivery mechanisms that put local residents to work or that are done while you have your zip car, you could also deliver a package. While you're in the ride-hailing car, you also deliver a package. How about getting trucks off of city streets as well as moving goods by rail rather than by truck?
Require probably some insurance changes, but it's probably doable.
Well, I do think goods movement is a big deal. At least I know from the work that I do on air quality and other challenges. It matters a lot. You know, the diesel that spews from trucks and rail and others, It's a big deal, and one of the biggest places, communities that have been left behind are the communities that always get stuck with the bus depots, with the idling buses. They're the ones that live around the ports, where we need to make some really significant investments. And are we seeing strategies for that? Are we seeing people invest in that, or is it has to be the local community who yells the loudest, gets paid attention to? What are we seeing nationally in terms of any interest in looking at goods movement strategically?
Well, I think there is, but I think we're very siloed in the U.S. We have to think comprehensively, regional plans and so forth, and I do think it's at the regional level. I think there can be federal priorities, and we hope they'll help someday again. You know, we won't have infrastructure plans that are really fairy tales about how the private sector will suddenly pay for it all, because they won't. They'll innovate, but they're not going to pay for it all, take it on. But so at regional levels, as long as people are thinking across industries, as long as they're thinking about the total flow of goods in their area, or the total flow of people in their area, we have to be multimodal. We have to think about the connections. And I think, again, regional leaders can do that and can point out the interconnections.
It's probably going to be easier to do it on a regional or local level from a planning standpoint, probably not from a financing standpoint, but from a planning standpoint, I think that the mayors in this room would tell you that we're very aware of the need to work across sectors. When we are looking at the performance metrics of our cities, we're not just looking at how public work works. We're looking at how public works interacts with trash collection and public safety and the health department and all of those departments. So you have to break down the silos and have an open field in order to fully and completely analyze. And I think that when you're talking about those types of things, movement of goods, transportation generally, a lot of people think that it should just be one department or something. It's got to be multiple, because the implications of transportation are so wide-reaching that if you leave out one sector that should have been there during the planning stage, then your planning may be very much incomplete, and it will not be nearly as effective, which means that you're not going to have the savings that you want. You're not going to create the efficiencies. So just about everything needs to be broken down and spread across the entire spectrum of stakeholders in order to get the best planning product, and then try to figure out how to finance that.
Can we just, I know we only have a few more minutes left, but I want to make sure that we hit on the issue of climate and how it relates to transportation and resiliency. Because I know that a lot of mayors are working on resiliency plans, and I think there are some really interesting gaps in the system that we really have to think about. Obviously, figuring out how transportation factors into, you know, emergency response. How do you think about how to access neighborhoods that you know are in floodplains where you need to access? Are mayors thinking about that? Are they thinking about, one of the things that's interesting, and I think the city of Boston's done a lot of work on this, to make sure that hospitals can continue to function by raising up all their HVAC systems. But I'm looking at it saying a lot of the roads that get in and out of hospitals may not actually, they may be working, but how do you get people in and out of them? You know, are people thinking about that? I mean, and this is for both the panel as well as others, about are we sharing ideas in lessons learned on how do we look at transportation in those emergencies and as we plan development moving forward?
Well, I'd be willing to bet that Mayor Turner and Mayor Suarez have probably had to look at those issues because of what happens in their various cities with sea rise levels increasing in Miami and the flooding that you had. For us, you know, we don't really have that problem. Our emergency planning is really limited to things a little bit more mundane, like huge and probably bad snowstorms that would impede travel generally. So we have a plan for that type of thing, but perhaps you guys have better and more concrete ideas.
One of the reasons it's on my mind is that Harvard just recently issued a report looking at how many deaths in Puerto Rico followed the hurricane, and it was very substantial. I I mean, they estimated over 4,000. And you know, a lot of, if you look at that, I mean, it was issued in a timely way so that the government could look at it in their planning process. But it identified areas where it wasn't, you know, they didn't have a generator, but you can't go for certain lengths of time without access. And they had people dying because of an inability to access medical care over a lengthy period of time. You know, and I just think these are important issues when you're thinking of transportation moving forward.
So I don't want to say that there are certain centralized plans one could have. There are also the possibility that innovators, private sector innovators, will have solutions. There was an innovator who wanted to create, and I don't know how far along he is on this plan, an app that would contact potential medical personnel in any disaster for an app directly, not through waiting for FEMA, waiting for the hospitals, but would mobilize talent already in the community. I do know that National Service, AmeriCorps, has a response corps, a disaster corps. I mean, we could do more. This is where, again, mayors can think about in their communities, depending on what the kind of emergency is. Where are the EMTs? Where are the people who have skis in a snowstorm? Where are the people who could be mobilized through technology, through apps, who would volunteer with a certain kind of neighborhood brigade captain? So we're not thinking imaginatively. And whether that would have helped in Puerto Rico, I think it probably would have, because we are a country of neighbor helping neighbor.
I hope we are.
Well, we used to be.
Yep, no,
We will be.
We all are. So what do you think? Are we actually the world's worst drivers in the city of Boston?
I was going to,
There's
yeah.
one vote.
Yeah. People
I'm
are
one of
nodding.
them.
Me too. I think we're great.
I think we're not the world's worst drivers. I think we have the worst, both traffic, but we also have the worst kind of roads to contend with, rotaries, and places where in order to get where you're going, you have to cross 5 lanes of traffic. We have a lot of the worst intersections anywhere, was because we had cow paths to begin with, but then even when we built certain things. So we have to think about infrastructure. We have to think about the traditional roads and where they cross rail, et cetera.
Sort of like that whole Maine thing where you can't get there from here. Telling people how to get anywhere in this city is quite interesting. All right, and May, do you want to, any of you want to weigh in on the issues of the resilience and climate resilience you need to look at in your transportation systems? Just for a minute.
Yeah, let me just say that's an issue that we had to deal with during Harvey, because we had a number of trucks that were bringing in.
Closer to.
We had a number of trucks that were attempting to bring in goods and supplies, simply couldn't get in because the roads were in the water, so we ended up having to fly things in as much as we could and then transport. And so now we are looking at how do we make our roads more resilient. And even as we build new roads and freeways or reconfigure existing ones, that is a key component that we are inserting, that the roads, the freeways must be much more resilient such that people can get in and out. I will say during the storm, a number of apps did develop during and after that can connect people to where the resources are, where the shelters are, where the volunteers can be connected. Several apps that were originated during the storm that's making us much better prepared. We're also putting up a lot of the technology. So people, for example, are not driving on the bridges where the water is already there, because we end up losing one police officer, for example, that drowned. And same thing, a public worker at the same time. So now all of those underpasses are now, the technology is now in place to keep and alert people from those type of things, and to alert people in neighborhoods when water is exceeding the banks or close to the bayous, things of that nature.
Well, I think we all have to learn from past experience, whether it's good or bad, to figure out what the challenges are moving forward. But I just want to say just 2 things is, Rosabeth, I think the world has changed remarkably. I'm not ruling out flying cars. I am not ruling out tunnels that go from New York to DC and get me there in half an hour. If it exists, I'm in it. and we're all for it. The remarkable things happen, and innovation moves in leaps and bounds, not little pieces. And I think that's our saving grace when you deal with an issue that's as challenging as climate, is to see where that next great idea is.
It's just that the people who have to be reelected in 4 years may find flying cars not their platform. I totally agree with you.
Well, maybe they won't get reelected. So the one thing I want to end is with a quote from Rosebeth, and there's this quote from her book. It said, "It all adds up to a new vision for American mobility, where local leaders shape initiatives without waiting for Congress to act, and ambitious companies partner with governments to tackle projects that serve the public good, create jobs, and improve quality of life while providing healthy sources of investment." That's what mayors do. That's what gives me hope in times of greatest difficulty. Thank you for everything you're doing, and thank you for a wonderful panel.
Ladies and gentlemen,
you very
this
much.
concludes our program for the main stage. We will now move to the closing reception hosted by Natixis. Please listen carefully for exit instructions. Mayors, please make your way up to the stage as we move to the Kenmore Room for the press conference. All other guests, please make your way downstairs to board the buses. The buses will take you to 888 Boylston Street, where Natixis is hosting a closing reception. These buses will depart at 4:45.